Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome along. Today we're diving into, well, a really pivotal moment, the Meiji Restoration.
Absolutely. We're going to look at how that old feudal system, centuries old, was taken apart.
And replaced with a new centralized government. It's fundamental, isn't it, for understanding modern Japan?
Totally. It's the foundation. And to really get it, you kind of have to start with the catalyst, the big event that set it all off.
Which was the Boshin War.
Exactly, the Boshin War.
Okay, so let's break that down. 1868, right? Meiji Year One.
That's the one. And it was basically, well, a conflict between the new government guys, mostly Satsuma and Choshu.
The ones pushing for change.
Yeah. And the forces still loyal to the old shogunate, domains like Aizu, Kuwana.
So where did it all kick off?
Near Kyoto, actually, the Battle of Toba-Fushimi.
And the new government forces won that one?
They did, and that was huge. It let them declare the shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, an enemy of the court.
Wow. So officially outlawed, sort of.
Pretty much. And then their focus shifted straight to Edo, the shogun's capital.
Right. But Edo wasn't besieged, was it? I remember reading it was surrendered peacefully.
That's one of the most amazing parts, really. April 1868, instead of this massive bloody battle everyone expected.
There were negotiations?
Yeah, between Saigo Takamori for the new government and Katsukaishu for the shogunate.
And they managed to work out a deal.
They did. Edo surrendered peacefully. Huge. Avoided so much destruction.
But that wasn't the absolute end of the war, though.
No, not quite. There were still pockets of resistance. Some loyalists kept fighting.
And didn't some northern domains band together?
The Oetsurapan Dome. A big alliance, mainly supporting the Aizu domain, which was fiercely loyal to the shogunate.
So there was still some serious fighting after Edo surrendered.
Oh, yeah. It took several more months. Aizu put up a really strong fight, but they eventually surrendered in September 68.
And the very last bit.
That was up in Hakodate, Hokkaido, May 1869. Inomoto Takayaki and the remnants of the shogunate navy held out at the Goryokaku fortress.
But they were defeated too.
They were, and that defeat really marked the final unification. The whole country was now, at least nominally, under the new government.
Okay, so war over. Now the real work begins. Building this new Japan. Dismantling feudalism.
Exactly. And the first big statement of intent, you could say, came really early. March 1868.
The Charter Oath.
The Charter Oath. 5 articles sworn by the emperor himself. Hugely symbolic.
And what did it actually say? What were the key ideas?
Well, a couple of really big ones. It stressed the importance of, public deliberation, kogyoran, getting wider opinion involved in decisions.
Which was pretty radical compared to the old shogunate way of doing things.
Totally. And it also talked about opening the country, taikoku washin, having friendly relations with other nations, setting a new direction.
I heard that Kido Takayoshi, who drafted it, originally called it a covenant.
Yeah, Miyaku. Shows how seriously they took it, like a foundational promise for the new era.
And then the very next day, something else came out. The 5 edicts.
Right, Gobin no Keiji. These were aimed more at the general public, less about grand principles, more about social order.
So what was in those?
A lot of it was based on traditional Confucian ethics. The 5 key relationships: lord retainer, parent child, husband wife, siblings, friends.
So trying to keep some social stability amidst all the change.
Seems like it. But interestingly, they also carried over some old rules, like prohibitions against factions, against forced petition.
And against Christianity too, wasn't that still banned?
It was initially, so it wasn't a complete break with the past, not straight away.
But those edicts didn't last too long.
No, they were phased out within a few years as things moved forward. They were kind of a transitional thing.
Okay, so principles laid out, some rules for the public. What about the actual structure of government?
Right. They needed a central body, so they promulgated the Seitaisho, the form of government.
And that created...
It basically concentrated power in this central administrative body called the Daishikan, the Grand Council of State.
So pulling power away from the old domains towards the center.
Exactly. And setting up a whole new system of officials to run it.
And alongside these big structural things, there were symbolic changes too, weren't there?
Oh, definitely. Really important ones, like changing the era name in September 1868.
To Meiji, meaning enlightened rule.
Yes, and establishing the one reign, one era name system is, say, Ishigen, linking the emperor directly to this new period.
And Edo getting a new name.
Yep. In July 68, Edo became Tokyo, the eastern capital.
And then the really big symbolic move, moving the capital itself.
Huge. The emperor moved from Kyoto, the imperial home, for, 1,000 years?
Yeah, forever, basically.
To Tokyo, and the government institutions followed the next year. That really cemented Tokyo as the new political center.
It's interesting. You hear Meiji Restoration now, but back then.
They often called it Goishin, the renewal, which really captures that feeling of hope and expectation they had for this new era, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, so the foundations are being laid. But the really big piece of dismantling feudalism was getting rid of the domains themselves, the Han.
Absolutely. That's the core of it, the Heian chicken.
But it happened in stages, didn't it? First was the Hanseki Huken.
Right. 1869, the return of domains and people. The daimyo, the feudal lords, formally gave their land titles back to the emperor.
Sounds decisive, but wasn't there a catch?
There was. The former daimyo still got paid stipends, kuroku, based on their old domain's income.
Okay.
And they were appointed as governors, chihanji, of their former domains.
Wait, so they gave up the land title but still ran the place and got paid?
Pretty much. So you can see it wasn't true centralization yet. It was a step, but a limited one.
So the real hammer blow came later.
Yes. July 1871. Heian chicken, the actual abolition of the domains and establishment of prefectures.
And this was pushed by the big players. Kido, Okubo?
They were key figures, yeah. They saw it was necessary for real unity and strength.
How did they pull it off? Did they just announce it?
Well, they were clever. First, they quietly gathered troops loyal to the central government in Tokyo the Goshinpei, mostly from Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa.
So they secured the military muscle first.
Exactly. Once they had that backing, they summoned all the domain governors, the former daimyo, to Tokyo.
Yep.
Then they announced it. All domains abolished, all governors dismissed, replaced immediately by centrally appointed prefectural governors, Fuchiji or Kenrei.
Wow, just like that.
Yeah.
You'd expect massive resistance, wouldn't you? Centuries of feudal power just wiped away.
You would. But remarkably, there was very little actual resistance. It went surprisingly smoothly.
Why? How could that happen?
A huge factor, maybe the biggest, was money. Or rather, the lack of it.
The domains were broke?
Many of them were in dire straits financially, especially after the Boshin War. The war costs just piled onto existing debt.
Like how bad was it?
We're talking serious debt. Some domains like Sendai, Akita, Mito apparently owed over 1 million ryo each. That's a fortune.
1 million ryo.
And the total declared debt of all domains was over 78 million ryo. That was nearly 2 years of the entire national revenue at the time.
Unbelievable. They were drowning in debt.
Completely. So when the central government basically said, we're taking over, but we'll also handle your debts.
Yeah. So the government took on the domain debts.
Yes, through things like debt cancellations for older debts, Kinrei, and converting newer debts into government bonds. It was a kind of bailout.
So losing power, but also losing a massive financial headache. That makes the lack of resistance much more understandable.
It certainly helped make the policy more palatable for many domains, even if they weren't thrilled about losing autonomy.
Does that account from the American teacher, Griffith, right, who was in Fukui?
Yeah, William Elliott Griffiths. He described the scene when the messenger arrived from Tokyo. Some initial shock, maybe some unrest. But he also noted that the more knowledgeable officials in Fukui quickly understood. They saw it as necessary as Japan's chance to, catch up with nations like the U.S. and Britain.
A necessary step for modernization.
Exactly. There was this sense of optimism alongside the uncertainty.
And Kido Takayoshi, one of the architects, wrote in his diary that day
That this laid the foundation for Japan to stand equally with the rest of the world. You really get a sense of the historical weight they felt.
So even for the people losing their traditional power, there was some understanding or maybe resignation about the need for this change.
It seems so. Griffith even described the farewell ceremony for the former Fukui lord. Thousands of people turned out, cheering as he left for Tokyo. A real mix of ending one era and starting another.
Okay, so just to wrap up what we've covered in this deep dive. We started with the Boshin War, the conflict that cleared the way.
Then the early steps, the charter oath, setting out principles, the new government structure taking shape, the symbolic moves like renaming Edo Tokyo and shifting the capital.
And finally, the big one. Heian Chicken, the abolition of the domains, which was made possible, surprisingly perhaps, by the terrible financial state they were in.
All leading to the dismantling of that centuries-old feudal system and the real beginning of a centralized, modern Japanese state.
The Meiji Restoration really was the launchpad for modern Japan, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Everything that followed builds on these foundational changes.
So a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. Consider that relatively smooth transition getting rid of the domains. Given centuries of feudal power, How did that happen with so little violence?
What does the huge role of economics, of that massive debt, tell us about how major political change can happen? And maybe think about, are there echoes of this, the interplay of economic pressure and political transformation, in challenges nations face even today?